Article 5. The Congress, whenever two-thirds of both houses shall deem it necessary, shall propose amendments to this Constitution, or on the application of the legislatures of two-thirds of the several states, shall call a convention for proposing amendments, which in either case shall be valid, to all intents and purposes, as part of the Constitution, when ratified by the legislatures of three-fourths of several states, or by conventions in three-fourths thereof, as the one or the other mode of ratification may be proposed by Congress, provided that no amendment which may be made prior to the year 1808 shall in any manner affect the first and fourth clauses in the ninth section of the first article, and that no state, without its consent, shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. 33 states would be required to sign on out of 50 states to invoke a convention of states. The several states would suggest that the total number of states making up the Union, and not just the 33 that invoke a convention of states. Three-fourths of 50 states would be between 37 and 38 states. There has been an interest in having a convention of states from both the left and right, from both progressives and fascists. With progressives, is due to the rampant corruption of corporate controlled politicians who are only passing legislation that helps their donors. Progressives want to get rid of Citizens United and use federal funds to combat climate change, provide medical care for all, provide free education, re-establish regulations on out-of-control corporations and banks, and guarantee voting rights for all. Whereas the alt-right claims to want to rein in federal spending and oversight, while establishing a theocratic, white nationalist dystopia that disenfranchises and marginalizes anyone that doesn't fit into their one-size-fits-all vision of the future. First, let's take a look at an article written by Roy Ulrich titled "A Progressive Call for a Constitutional Convention." Looking at the Constitution as was written at the time, it was written by rich landowners who owned slaves and who basically set everything up to benefit them and their class. And there was wiggle room enough that we're able to expand rights, get more freedoms, more liberties as we went along. Of course, this was strongly opposed by those who wanted to keep their privileged place in society and keep the others subjugated. Also talks about how a convention called by the states for altering the Constitution has never taken place. Not even once so far. There has been constitutional conventions for little amendments and here and there, but nothing major. And a lot of times also the threat of a runaway convention states by one side or the other has made people back down because they didn't want the other side getting the hooks in and getting what they wanted in. So they shut it down out of fear of the opposition taking over. So, and that could happen here as well. There's two types of constitutional conventions that can be called: general and limited. The general convention would be free to consider any and all additions to the Constitution, as well as alterations to existing constitutional provisions. The limited convention would be restricted by its call to authorizing legislation to consideration of a single issue or a group of issues, as specified by the states in their applications. Conventions can be open project and calling for, of course, limited government, term limits, which on congressmen, that part I actually agree with, imposing fiscal restraints and whatnot. But at the same time, they're wanting to arrange it so that they undo the Constitution and put in a fascist doctrine with themselves um, running things. So, objections summarized by Alan Rostron, constitutional law scholar, University of Missouri Law School, according to this article. What everyone thinks about these proposed amendments, trying to pass them through an Article 5 convention is a risky business. The Constitution does not specify how the delegates for such a convention would be chosen, how many delegates each state would have, what rules would apply at the convention, or whether there would be any limits on what amendments in the convention could consider. A convention that was called to address a specific issue, such as budget deficits, might propose changes to freedom of speech, the right to keep and bear arms, the electoral college, or anything else in the Constitution. There's no rule or precedent saying what the proper scope of the convention's work would be. Unquote. Followed by progressive would have strict rules to be adhered to, and it's listed as such. 1. Call would be for a general convention. 2. 535 delegates, the total number of House and Senate seats. 3. Delegates chosen by election or by the state legislature. 4. Each state assigned the same number of delegates as it has in the House of Representatives and comply with one person, one vote requirement. 5. Two-thirds supermajority required to pass an amendment. 6. Delegates must include members of third parties and independents. 7. And on that one, I would think that the territories such as Puerto Rico, Guam, the Virgin Islands, D.C. would be included in that part there. 7. Protection for Bill of Rights guaranteed, except possibly the Second Amendment, by limiting the right to bear arms to those serving in a militia. And because the rules would be established in advance, it says here that it'd be difficult to reach 34 states, the threshold. But Article 5 says no time limit to gain the 34th Street. And the conservative alt-right group is working on that at this moment. Final quote that they mention in the article from the University of Texas Constitutional Law professor Sanford Levinson. Quote, "We must recognize that substantial responsibility for the defects of our policy lies in the Constitution itself. A number of wrong turns were taken at the time of the initial drafting of the Constitution, even if for the best of reasons given the political realities of 1787. If I am correct that the Constitution is both insufficiently democratic in a country that professes to believe in democracy and significantly dysfunctional in terms of the quality of government that we receive, then it follows that we should no longer express our blind devotion to it." Unquote. We should not be treating, in other words, don't be treating the Constitution like it's a sacred document. It's a contract, a social contract that can be and should be amended to fit the times and not be abused and eradicated and replaced with a fascist manifesto by alt-right, theocratic white nationalists, which the next part of the video will go more into the Convention of States project and who's supporting it and why. The alt-right version of the Convention of States, they call themselves Convention of States Action. And here I'm looking at the executive summary of Convention of States project. So it's a couple different terms they use there. So it says in their introduction, the root of the frustration felt by citizens across America is that our federal government does whatever it wants. And so they can hook you in with that's true, because a lot of it, they do pretty much what they want. They don't do what either side on. What they're complaining about, of course, is usually it's protection of the marginalized and the poor. So in this case, they're upset about their privileged place being threatened. Where in the left side, we're trying to get progressive change and we're being ignored. I'd say that there's more being ignored on the left, trying to help people, than what's being ignored on the right. Especially since the conservative states are running roughshod over people's voting rights. It goes on to say there's nothing ordinary citizens can do about it. It doesn't seem to matter who they sent to represent them in Washington, D.C., they have lost control of their government. Which is understandable how everyone would feel that, which is basically everyone in Washington, corporate Democrats and Republicans, are also corporatists, are doing what their donors want, not what the. Under how the process works, they mention about opponents of the process, say because Article 5 itself is as silent as procedural details of convention, they have no idea how the meeting would function. But the way they propose, what they say the framers did it, and maybe they did, but you can compare how this is vastly contrasts with the way it was proposed in the progressive article. It says, for instance, voting at an interstate convention is always done as states, with each state getting one vote, regardless of population or number of delegates in attendance. So your population is really not. So a minority could impose their will on the majority. In this case, it could be a right-wing radical majority imposing their views on everyone else. State legislatures choose and instruct their delegates to the convention. Delegates are legally bound to follow those instructions. Now, we've seen how that works out in the Electoral College, who's actually voted their own way despite what they were supposed to vote during elections. So we're not going to go on the background. We'll look at that in a minute. The Convention of States action here, project, whatever, is proposing that that it be restricted to proposing amendments that will impact fiscal restraints on the federal government. Because are they going to include the military in that, which is one of the biggest expenditures? Probably not. We're probably going to talk about restricting the use of funding on actually helping people, Medicare for all, free college, that kind of thing. Limit its power and jurisdiction. They're not very specific in that. Probably is going to be they're going to wherever it's keeping them from imposing discrimination. They don't want to be. They want the power to continue to discriminate and impose term limits on its officials and members of Congress. That part I happen to agree with. There does need to be term limits. There are lifelong corporate puppets, both Democrats and Republicans in there, that have been there too long and that they're just serving their trading stocks, doing insider trading. They need to be removed and their power limited. So there's been 19 states so far signed on to this Convention of States for the alt-right, trying to overthrow the United States. Endorsements: Mark Levin, Ron DeSantis, Mark Meadows, Dave Rubin, Sean Hannity, Rick Santorum, Senator, Rick Green, Greg Abbott, Rand Paul, Sarah Palin, Ben Shapiro, James Dobson, Marco Rubio, Jim DeMint, Mike Huckabee, Ben Carson, Chip Roy, Bobby Jindal, Alan West, Steve Hilton, Charlie Kirk, James O'Keefe, Jeff Duncan, Ben Saucy, Mark Robinson, Pete Coors, David Barton, Lawrence Jones, Bill Cohen, Steve Diaz, Jeb Bush, on and on. Same types that seek to do a coup in the United States and replace our freedoms with their idea of freedom, which is to impose their religious views and whatnot on the rest of us. So